lesson 2, we're going to talk about note choice. Note choice is one of the more artistic elements of improvisation that we're going to talk about. And by that, I'm distinguishing this from some of the more technical aspects. We talked about harmonic analysis. I think that's a more technical element. We're going to talk about patterns, positions, fingerings, and those kinds of things. And I think those are very technical as well. But note choice is really the artistic aspect of what it is you're doing. Although we're going to narrow this down to a definitely non-artistic series of questions and skills that focus on the distinction between consonance and dissonance. Or another way you might have heard people talk about some of these ideas is tension and release. Well, at first, we need to be able to distinguish what is consonant and what is dissonant. And we're going to take that question very scientifically before we start getting into the artistic elements of why you choose the notes that you choose. So let's just talk a little bit about what consonants and dissonance are, and then we're going to focus in this lesson entirely on learning how to play consonants. And that is not going to be an artistic kind of practice. It's going to be a very clinical kind of practice where you're given a chord, you have to restrict your note choices to the consonant notes. Well, in order to do that, you have to understand some of the theory background on what makes a note consonant in relation to a given chord. You're going to probably want to review some of the theory topics here. In the last lesson, we talked a little bit about diatonic triads, but it would be helpful here to go back even further to a lesson on simply triads or even just on the major scale so that you can understand some of the building blocks for these kinds of things if that is unclear at any point here. So you're going to see a couple links. Feel free to go pause, listen to those lessons. It can't hurt. They're usually very short. They're not exhaustive. Consonance means that there's no tension, there's no dissonance in a consonance. And what you're hearing when you hear consonant sounds, and I'm talking specifically here about the relationship between a note and an underlying chord. So when you're talking about consonant sounds, it means that the note you're playing, in this case, you're an improviser, you're playing lead guitar, the note you're playing is a note that belongs to the chord of the moment. All right. So in a simple example, maybe there's only one chord in a progression. It's a triad. Let's just say for the sake of argument, it's a C chord. When I say a C chord, I mean a C triad. So we're talking about a 3-note chord. When you have a consonant relationship between the note that you're playing as an improviser and the chord of the moment, it means that note is found in the chord. In other words, it's a chord tone. So there are 3 chord tones in a C major triad or in any triad. And if you want to play something consonant as an improviser, you're playing one of those 3 notes. Well, you can see right away, this is going to bring up a lot of questions about chord spellings. Now, I want to just talk you down a little bit. If that sounds intimidating, yes, there are 12 major triads, there are 12 minor triads. It would be wonderful if you knew right off the top of your head how to spell every single one of them, but that's probably not going to happen today or tomorrow or next week. So yes, you should be working towards that, but as a guitar player, you've really got a lot of nice shortcuts, I guess I'm going to say, to being able to do this without necessarily having that theory knowledge perfectly assimilated. And those things are fingerings, patterns, diagrams, that kind of stuff. So you're going to be able to use those fingering diagrams to be able to play the notes of a C chord or whatever, a G flat minor, even though you probably are not going to be able to spell a G flat minor chord off the top of your head anytime soon. So that's good in the sense that it's going to get you playing sooner. It's bad in the sense that you could conceivably avoid learning any of these things for a really long time or ever, and you should learn them eventually. You should be able to spell a G flat minor chord off the top of your head someday. But let's be realistic. We want to play some music here. So we're going to now speak a little bit about consonants and then what I think of as kind of the layers or levels of dissonance, because there's only one kind of consonance, but there are a few kinds of dissonance. And understanding these distinctions is one of the things that's going to allow us to make more educated choices about our improvisation. What we're working towards here is not an improvisation where you just noodle around a bunch of fingering patterns. We want a really elevated consciousness about the notes that you're going to play and why you're playing them and what sort of effect they're going to give you. In order to do this at first, you got to be able to distinguish simply between consonants and dissonance. So consonants is chord tones. Now, everything else I kind of think of in sort of a pyramidal hierarchy, where at the top of the pyramid, I imagine there to be simply the root. The root is, of course, the most consonant note. Now, over any given chord, you've got two other notes that are perfectly consonant within the context of that triad. You've got the other chord tones, the third and the fifth. So at the top of my pyramid are the notes that are always going to work. Those are thirds and fifths. Below that, I've got the next level, the first level of dissonance. The first level of dissonance is the notes that are going to be somewhat tense, but not disruptively tense. And those notes are the pentatonic notes. Okay, over a major chord, they're a little bit different than over a minor chord. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to say that the pentatonic notes are the next level down, where you start introducing some slight dissonance. They're definitely not consonant like chord tones are. So that adds two notes now, because we went from a 3-note triad to a 5-note pentatonic scale. So it still contains the 3 chord tones, but we've added 2 dissonant notes that are sort of the first level of dissonance. The next level, where we're adding more notes, is to go now from the 5-note pentatonic scale to the 7-note major or minor scale. This is the full key that we're in, all 7 notes of the major or minor key or mode or whatever it is. Now we've added 2 more notes, and those notes are going to be more dissonant than the 2 notes that we added from the pentatonic scale. Beyond that, you have the remaining 5 chromatic notes that don't belong to the key that you're in. Now, for our purposes at the beginning of this course, you want to think of those notes as simply things to avoid. Later on, we'll learn how you can incorporate them occasionally to give you sounds that just simply aren't available within the context of the key. All right, so let's just recap that real fast. We have top of the pyramid, consonant notes, roots, thirds, fifths. First level of dissonance is to add your pentatonic notes. Your next level of dissonance is to add in the remaining 2 notes of the major or minor scale or whatever key you're in. And the next level of being very dissonant is your 5 chromatic notes, the notes that don't belong to the key that you're in. Take 4. I'm going to play some chord sound on my left hand. It'll be C chord. And I'm going to use the notes of that chord to play melodies in the right hand. So this is the sound of playing chord tones, or you could also think of them as arpeggios. Now, assuming I don't miss the keys, you can hear that those are consonant sounds. They go right with the chord sound. There's no tension there. There's no dissonance. And this is the thing that I'm going to ask you to do in the play-along example for this lesson, is play improvised melodies that are limited to chord tones, limited to arpeggios. And this is actually harder than it sounds, because you're going to want to play the rest of the scale shape. But I really strongly feel like that is a core improvisational practice. So that's going to be something that we focus heavily on in the example for this lesson, in the play-along example. Now let's listen to what happens when I start leaving the chord tones and go to that next level of dissonance, which is the pentatonic scale. So if you play a pentatonic scale starting from the C here, it's going to be scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. We've kept the 3 chord tones, and now we've added scale degree 2, we've added scale degree 6. Let's just listen to scale degrees 2 and 6 over the top of the C chord. C chord, here comes scale degree 2. Now, you can hear what I mean, hopefully, that this is not a painful dissonance. This is actually really kind of nice. But it's not a chord tone either. If you listen to the sound of moving it up or down a step, that consonant sound of the chord tone is a lot different than this layer of dissonance here that you get when you play scale degree 2. If I go up to scale degree 3, you can hear that's right back inside that consonant chord tone sound. Here's back to 2. Let's do the same thing up here on 6. You can hear that it sort of wants to resolve down to 5. So now I'm going to run through this scale slowly here. Now, that dissonance has the character that it does because it's a whole step away from other chord tones, all right? The C was a whole step away from the notes around it that are chord tones, and so is the 6th. It's a whole step away from 5. This is a lot different from half-step dissonance, and that's the next layer of dissonance. Now, if I'm playing this C chord and I play scale degree 4, you could see that that's a half step away from chord tone 3 here. Listen to this. That's a really dissonant sound because of this. Even though it's separated by an octave, well, in a way this makes it even more dissonant. Listen to this. That sound is inside here. And that is why 4 is an extremely dissonant note. It definitely wants you to resolve it down to 3. Let's listen to the same thing going on here on 7. Now this one is different than 4. This is a usable sound, this 7th scale degree here over a C chord. That's nice. That's just like we played a C major 7 chord. But there's no question that it's dissonant. It wants to go up to the root. But it's usable. As opposed to the 4, which is just, that's a special sound. It wants to go back down to 3 or maybe up to 5. All right, let's do some just quick little melodies here just so you can get a feel for how this is going to work. Chord tones. If I play some pentatonic stuff, now I'm going to add the 4th and the 7th. So you can hear the 4 and the 7 are not bad. It's not that you have to avoid them completely, but you want to use them sparingly and you want to resolve them correctly. And probably in the case of the 4, you're going to want to use it as a passing tone exclusively. You really don't want to lay on that sound like you can lay on this one, but you don't want to lay on that one. These 2 and 6 scale degrees, yeah, you can sit on those for a while. That doesn't hurt anything. But the 4, you got to be really careful of, and the 7 is also potentially very dissonant depending on how you use it. All right, last thing we're going to do is contrast those sounds with the chromatic notes. Now, since we're in the key of C, the chromatic notes here are all the black keys. If I start throwing in black key notes and just smack them over the top of the C chord, they're awful. They just sound wrong. Well, there are ways that you can use them, but you have to place them properly in between notes that do belong to the key. And so if I start playing chromatic passing tones here in sort of a jazz context, see, there are ways that you can make them sound like they kind of belong. And I didn't really hammer away at any of those notes. I made sure that they were passing tones and that they had a destination. And I didn't, do that with, any wonderful musicality. If you're Charlie Parker, you're doing this and it sounds brilliant. So anyway, hopefully that gives you some sense of what I'm talking about here with these layers of dissonance and how we're going to do that. All right, let's wrap it up and we'll get to the play along example. Like everything else, I'm always saying this, practicing this takes a long time. And you need a lot of different examples. The fact that the guitar is played in all these different positions and all these different fingerings and stuff means that you have to do all of these exercises at least 5 different ways, because you got to be able to use them over all the different fingering patterns. As you know, I'm a big fan of the caged system when you're learning this stuff. I think that it's the simplest framework to use to understand how to do all these things. So I'm going to give you some examples, and there's going to be some play-along stuff here. Here's how it's going to work. We're going to have a progression, and I'm going to give you all the information. All right, what key are we in? What are the chords? And then you're going to see some prompts for how you're going to move between the 2 or 3 chords in the progression. We're going to keep the progression real simple. Your job is to only play the notes that are part of the chord. That means you've only got 3 choices. You're sticking to the consonant sounds over any given chord. So we're going to play all triads in these progressions. You've got to play some kind of improvisation with only the 3 notes of the chord. It's not going to be the most musically rewarding experience you've ever had, but this is the essence of this course, is to make very carefully controlled and educated choices about what notes you are going to play. Then you run those through a series of exercises that cover most of the bases for where you might do stuff on the guitar. I can only give you a handful of examples here. What you really need to do is create other play-along examples for yourself, or find play-along examples that you can use that are easy enough to analyze, and be able to do this in a variety of keys. It's just not feasible for me to give you this exercise in all the different keys for all the different positions. So I'm going to demonstrate the concept to you primarily here, and then you really should try to practice this in a lot of different keys, a lot of different positions. So it's keeping it to the chord tones. All right, now I'm going to further prompt you on the screen in our play along example to play the right pattern. So we're going to do it in just a single position. And when the chord changes, I'm just going to show you all the notes that belong to that chord in the given position that I've chosen. This is the same thing as saying we're going to play arpeggios. Arpeggios mean you take the notes of a chord, you play them one at a time so that they're melodic instead of harmonic. So in other words, this is an arpeggio exercise, but it's a little bit different way of thinking it from how you might have practiced arpeggios as just kind of a fingering or a dexterity exercise or something like that. Because I really want you to attempt to be as musical as possible. Attempt to use this to play a real solo. But like I said, you're extremely limited when you only have consonants, but that's good. I really want you to feel what it's like to only limit yourself to, the core notes, the core tones. Some examples of what this sounds like melodically are probably going to jump out at you right away. You've heard stuff like this if you've heard Reveille, that you use to wake up the army in the morning, or the sound of the racetrack. That's what you hear because of the instrument that is being played on, the bugle. The bugle can only play the notes of a major arpeggio, because that's how a brass instrument with no valves can only do that. And that's one of the things that you as a guitar player want to be able to emulate, is being able to make some kind of music with only those choices. So here comes our example. You're going to have to click here to get to the example. It's in a separate video so that you can loop it if you need to, and watch the prompts. When you've done this a few times, your job is to first move it to other positions. Use the same example, move it to other positions. So I'm going to give it to you in one of the 5 caged positions. Your job is to figure out the other 4. Then figure out how to do this in other scenarios, whether it's something you're recording for yourself to play over, or you find other examples over which this might work. We're only doing this on the major chords. I realize that leaves a lot out, but like I said, we can only do so much here in one example. So good luck. I'll see you back here for lesson 3.